Our word of the day, our word of the day. Now we've reached our word of the week. So our word of the week is intertextuality. And simply put, this prefix, if we look at this prefix, inter means between. So if inter means between, then the word intertextuality. So a text is a constructed artifact that carries meaning. And intertextuality is simply the relationship between texts. So, for example, in our instance, as students of college English, in academic essays, there's intertextuality in the sense that writers engage in conversation with the works of outside texts, like articles, books, documentaries, etc. So one of the more salient characteristics of academic writing is the fact that, okay, let's say you, Ben Smith, write an article exploring one component of the descent of into madness of Lady Macbeth in the Shakespeare play. Then someone else, let's call her Maria Perez, writes another article contesting that point. Then a third writer, let's call, Jim Taylor, writes another article actually taking a part of something that Maria Perez said, a little element, and actually expanding it and carrying the conversation forward. So it's very much like that one thing is said and the other thing's either contested or countered, and then another writer comes and probably extends something that the previous text said very little of. So it's very much like a conversation. And let me give you it's actually like improv comedy. I don't know if you guys have ever seen improv comedy, but when one idea is thrown, then the other actor takes it forward, and so it reminds me of that. Now, why am I talking about this? Why is our word of the week intertextuality? Well, we're actually going to look at how that works in academic writing, and it's an important element to note, and there is no way that we can skip over that. So let's return to my sample essay that I wrote as a grad student. So I want you to pay attention to how I incorporate the works of outside sources. This was a class that I took about writing center studies. So in order to be a writing center tutor, I needed to take this class. And this particular assignment was asking that I come up with my teaching philosophy for being a writing tutor. So I want you to see how I engage in conversation with that, okay? Again, check it out. My own title is not in quotation marks because it's my title. It's my essay, right? Okay. Rather than being overly concerned with fixing students' papers, the praxis behind my operating as a writing tutor instead places a heavy focus on the student itself. Now, you need to give the author's full name. Then you can call them by their last name, subsequently in your essay. But at first, you need to give their full name, and you need to say what their credentials are in terms of why are they an authority figure on this topic, right? So check it out. Stephen M. North, in his article, The Idea of a Writing Center, okay, clearly establishes the objective of the writing tutor. And we're going to talk about soon why articles are put around quotation marks. Sorry, why quotation marks are put around them. So Stephen M. North, in his article, The Idea of a Writing Center, clearly establishes the objective of the writing tutor. Here's a direct quote. Our job, anytime you want to clarify the subject, you can put parentheses. So I put WC because R in this instance who's the subject, is the writing center, okay? So our job at the writing center is to produce better writers, not better writing. North, page 438. And then check this out. Rather than just handing over the microphone to the source, much like a lawyer who calls witnesses to the stand and uses exhibits, you as a writer have to have the central control of your writing. Like, don't just say, this source says X, this source says Y, this source says Z, and then you leave it like that. I mean, if you do it that way, I mean, I could just read those sources for myself. No, you need to engage in conversation with those sources. Much like a lawyer who brings a witness to the stand, and after that they say, based on the testimony of this witness, it is demonstrated that blank, and then what is their central argument or thesis, which we'll get into in a moment. So again, you're using outside sources to engage in a conversation with, okay, much like a lawyer does, and you're doing it deliberately with the aim of supporting your central argument. So this reasoning makes perfect sense to me and resonates deeply with my own conception of what a service job like a writing tutor is supposed to be focused on. The student is at the center of this job, not just fixing their paper. So this was about the whole conception of what it means to be a writing tutor, right? Is it fixing the paper of the student, or is it creating the conditions for the students to come across that knowledge on their own, right? And crafting the best version of their paper. But the point here is not for you to be so much interested in the actual topic that I'm writing in. The point is more for you to see how I'm actually going about, interweaving the works of outside sources. So check this out. All right, let's continue here. Yeah, let's look at it here. The way that I would move to clarify a student's understanding of writing is predicated upon my subscription to the idea of writing as a process and the social approach to composition and writing. That is to say that I would operate under a framework of talking out the ideas in a 2T's mind and paper. My reference to the social approach is keenly elucidated in Kenneth A. Brefait's article, Peer Tutoring and the Conversation of Mankind. So I say the title, right? Brefait develops his approach based upon the assertion that as civilized beings, check this out, 3 dots, that's an ellipses. Anytime you wish to omit anything, then you can use ellipses, which is to say that there are many times when the whole quote is not really going to serve your aim or objective, right? Just take what is of service to you as a writer, and then include an ellipsis to say, hey, there's more, but we have omitted in this instance. Brefait develops his approach based upon the assertion that, as civilized human beings, this says that there was more, we are the inheritors of a conversation. Brefait 88. Now, I don't know if you remember the idea of a quote sandwich, but when you drop a quote, don't just leave it as such. You need to. Say like what you're saying is the bread, and then the quote is like the meat in the middle, and then you put the other bread. So you need to always comment on what you say. Don't just say, oh, this article says this, and then that documentary says that, and this book says the third. No, it's always with the intent of strengthening your central argument, right? Your central project. Because when we write, we have a project. We have a central project, just like genres do, right? Opinion piece wants to be persuasive. Let's say about getting you to switch to electric vehicles, right? Let's say that's the central project there. I'm mentioning that because I'm talking about the use of quotes, right? Okay, here's another one. Reflective thought is public or social conversation internalized. Ellipses, okay. Actually I'm going to read that because I just want you to see how I engage in conversation with it. So here's the direct quote from Buffet, which I've already established. Buffet makes a tacit connection between reflective thought and writing, and furthermore, goes on to label them as extensions of conversation. Reflective thought is public or social conversation internalized. If thought is internalized, public and social talk, then writing is internalized conversation, re-externalized. I know that's pretty circular, and a lot of theoretical texts often are. But bear with them. Bear with the genre. So here's me again. So the explicit establishment of writing as an internalized conversation, re-externalized, and I'm putting it in quotation marks because that's a direct verbatim quote to something that came in the quote prior, right? That I just used. The explicit establishment of writing as internalized conversation, re-externalized, informs the central tenet of my writing tutor philosophy that deals with my decision to elicit more thorough analysis and consideration through vocalizing questions and repeating back to the 2T my understandings of his or her ideas and points. This is with the aim of creating a dialogue which is conducive to further reflective thoughts and ultimately helps with the process of writing. So again, I want to remind you that the central task of this paper is for me to establish my writing philosophy, right, as a writing tutor. Now, my central project is to demonstrate how writing is a process that it's a social process in the sense that it needs to be about the student, yeah, and through talking out your ideas, you're able to create the conditions for the student to reach that point where they can more clearly express what it is that they want to say. Yeah. So if you're a student-centered teacher or tutor, then you want to create the conditions for the best version of what the students have to say. Right? You don't want to. I don't want to make clones of myself. No way. I want to create the conditions for the best version of what the students are bringing, right? Okay. Now, check this out. I'm not going to ask you to do it this term, but I just wanted to show you how this works, okay? Because I know that with research, you're like, oh my goodness, there's all this material. How do I know what to use? It's overwhelming. It's daunting. Well, hopefully, by the end of this term, it'll seem less daunting and more doable. So I personally view research as a puzzle, and I look at outside works as puzzle pieces, and I want to put them together to support my central project, my writerly project, yeah? So when you are considering sources, you want to have this in mind, okay? Number one is, let's do first person, yeah? My own central project. Let's call it writerly project, yeah? A writerly project is, why the heck are you writing this? What do you want to say? What is it in you that is burning that actually led you to write this, right? So your own writerly project. If we return to that example of, hey, fossil fuels are creating an impact on our atmosphere, and because of that there's global warming and we're burning fossil fuels, so on and so forth. Therefore, you should switch over to electric cars. Let's say I'm writing an opinion piece in the Los Angeles Times. So my writerly project is to persuade you to switch over to an electric car, okay? Or whatever the case may be. What is your writerly project? And that's what your thesis is, yeah? What's your central argument? So, my own writerly project, okay? Now, the other one is when you're looking for a source that can help support your writerly project, so we'll say the writerly project slash component of the source that aligns with my we'll just say thesis, right? Because writerly project and thesis are actually interchangeable, yeah? Like you're writing to support your thesis, your central argument. And we're going to talk about thesis in a little bit, so don't get too frazzled. If you're like, hey, you're throwing all these different terms in my way, you're asking me to juggle them. No, we'll talk about that in a moment, okay? So, when considering sources, you have to be clear what your own writerly project is. Second, when you're looking at another source, the writerly project or component of the source that aligns with my thesis. So, let's say my writerly project is to bring an end to human trafficking. Ooh, that's huge, right? And some students have written about that. Now, let's say that I watch a documentary, I read an article, and I read a book, and I'm looking for writerly projects of those sources or components of those sources that align with my own project. So let's say my project is bring awareness to human trafficking and put an end to it by way of letting the public know what things to look for in when someone is in danger, right? So if we know, and then what we can do about it, yeah. So this is where you can answer this. How does component of the outside? Let's put outside. How does this outside sources writerly project / component align with my own thesis? Thesis, writerly project, those can be interchangeable, yeah? Let's go ahead and write that there. So, let's say, let's return to that human trafficking example, yeah? Let's say one documentary I watch, there's like a part where it tells you exactly what to look for in people who are being victimized or trafficked. Okay, let's say that documentary is about things to look for. Then I read a book, and in that book there's a chapter all about what we can do when we see people who are under this horrific situation. Like what can we do about it? And then let's say I read an article, and in that article there's a portion that talks about why human trafficking is significant to begin with, and why we should care and do something about it. Yeah. So I take those three puzzle pieces. Number one, the puzzle piece of signs to look for. Number two, the puzzle piece of what I can do about it. Number three, why it's a big deal, why it's a significant issue that people should care about. So there's an instance of that, and I want you to remember this. I just want to remind you that in this hypothetical example, my own project or thesis was to underscore just how horrific and significant the ramifications are of human trafficking, why it's a big deal, and what signs we can look for, and what can we do about it. Yeah, so that was my own project thesis. So I found different pieces from outside sources to fit together, and so that I can engage in conversation with it, yeah? And intertextuality is important because if not, it's just like, oh, here's my opinion, but if you're not using any empirical data or information to support you, then it's much weaker, yeah? So it's academic writing is very much like a lawyer type situation. So bear this in mind. Your own writerly project or thesis, the writerly project or component of an outside source that aligns with my thesis, and last thesis/Rively project. And lastly, how there's alignment, okay? That's crucial. You need to be able to clarify for yourself how there's alignment, yeah? And that's precisely what I did here. This is called an annotated bibliography. When I was writing this paper, I did this, which is the annotated bibliography. So, which is essentially just answering this. So check this out. So I did it with this first article. In this short periodical article, Jeff Brooks illustrates how to be a minimalist writing tutor. Quotation marks, that's a direct quote from his article. The piece develops minimalist tutoring as a method that places students in the driver's seat of their papers, so to speak. Okay, so I'm synthesizing the project of this paper, or at least the component that works with what I want to do in my own, yeah? Oftentimes, tutors take so much control during a tutorial that they relay a message of authority and control, whether consciously or subconsciously. One of the practical pieces of advice that Brooks, see, I said Jeff Brooks here, then I call him by his last name afterward. You can call the author by their last name after you have introduced them, yeah? You can't just go off and call them by their last name if you haven't introduced them. Okay, one of the practical pieces of advice that Brooks offers against this is as simple as this. Sit beside the student, not across the desk. The implication of sitting beside the student during a tutoring session is that you're there to help and provide a situation for them to talk about their writing with you. From this, check this out. Alignment. So what do you aim to take from the source, yeah? How is there alignment with your own project? And I'm answering that here. From this text, what I most aim to appropriate for my own tutoring philosophy is a definitive student-centeredness. I want to make the student the primary agent in the writing center session. Here's a direct quote. I'm using that puzzle piece to support my project, yeah, in this instance. And make the student understand that your paper has value as a piece of writing. It is worth reading and thinking about like any other piece of writing. That's a direct quote. Oftentimes, this is missing in the minds of students. Even though this minimalist type tutoring positions the student as doing the work, I still view it as a collaboration. The contribution of the tutor is creating the situation for the tutee to further reach realizations about their own work. Okay, so see how that works? When you're looking at sources, whether you're looking at the synopsis of a documentary or the abstract of an article, which is really just a summary, a synopsis of the article. You're looking even at a table of contents of a book. You have to have this in mind, yeah, alignment. That's the main thing. So how is there alignment with your own project? Much like when a lawyer chooses a set of witnesses and prepares a set of exhibits, they do it deliberately so that there's alignment with their own central argument, yeah? Okay. So that's it for this. Oh, one last thing. I was almost forgetting. So the more logistical things. Now, the more logistical things for citing. Check this one out. I've included 3 instances, and you know what? I'm actually going to include this bit of notes in our module for this week. Okay, let's look at this first instance. It took 30 years for changes to be made. The fact that it's in quotation marks means that it is a verbatim and direct quote, okay, from Perez, yeah, the person's last name. Maybe this was a book, page 40, okay. It took 30 years for changes to be made, quotation marks around it, and then in parentheses, person's last name, page number, period goes after, okay. That's one instance. Here's another instance. According to Jim Taylor, only 25% of the workers had a retirement plan. And you might be saying, whoa, wait a minute, Mr. Godoy. Why is this not in quotation marks? So if you're paraphrasing, what someone is saying, right? If it's not like verbatim, like this is the exact wording that they use. No, if you're paraphrasing what your source says, then you do not have to put it in quotation marks. But I am crediting the author, see, according to Jim Taylor. And another thing, too, you'll say, whoa, how come it doesn't say Taylor 8? Good question. I'm glad you asked that. You didn't ask that, but I was hoping you would. The reason it doesn't say Taylor 8 is because you want to avoid redundancy. That's the aesthetic that you can bear in mind when performing citation practices, okay? So we don't say Taylor 8 here because we already said Taylor here at the beginning. You don't want to say Taylor, Taylor. So that's the rationale, is to avoid redundancy. Check out this third example. In an interview with Maria Garcia, she divulged the reasoning behind her defection to Canada. So, I've already said it's an interview. I've already said who it's with. So there's no need to write here, interview Maria Garcia, because then that would be redundant, right? So watch out for that, okay? Those are the three instances that come to mind right now.